Grit Crusaders. I'm Brooke Plack, your host here today on the Grit Crusade podcast, where we get real in the trenches about life, relationships, and business. And today we are on part 3 of a mini-series talking about defense mechanisms and how these show up in our life, and not only in negative ways, but sometimes they are positive as well. So if you haven't seen episode 1 or 2 of the mini-series, we'll be sure, or part 1 and 2 of the mini-series, we'll be sure and drop those in the show notes. And today's episode is brought to us by the Space Co-working and Event Venue located in downtown Benton. So for part 1 of this mini-series, we uncovered displacement and intellectualization. Part 2, we talked about avoidance and denial. And again, these aren't always bad things. And sometimes defense mechanisms are necessary to get us through hard times in life, help us to process that hard stuff. But it's what we do after that that matters. And so today we're going to talk about projection and rationalization and how that shows up in our journeys and our growth, because that's what we're really about here is what are we doing in life right now? How is that working for us? And what can we do to grow for our next chapter, our next journey? And so before we get started, I want to ask for you guys to go ahead and be sure and like us if you're watching us on YouTube. So give this video a thumbs up and make sure you're subscribed to our channel. And if you're listening on your favorite podcast streaming platform, we would love for you to give us a review as we are new content creators. And make sure you subscribe to the podcast as well, and you won't miss any of the episodes as they drop each week on Thursday. So today's first part is projection. The second part is rationalization. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from my notes because I like to be accurate with these definitions. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm just a regular girl learning the way as we go in leadership in our lives. So projection is taking your own unacceptable feelings or thoughts and putting them on another person as if they belong to them. So, well, I know she's going to think. Well, I know they're going to say, no, you don't. No, you don't. Now, yes, right, you could argue there's patterns of behavior that people have shown and you assume, right? But the goal is really here, you're trying to relieve your own anxiety that you have about a thought, feeling, or characteristic, and it allows you to express that without owning it. Like, you know they going to say, you know how they're going to be. People are all going to, okay, wait, is that your feeling? Because it sounds like you're putting that out onto someone else. All right. And this is how I see this showing up often in others, is it causes a lack of action. So many times we get so worried about what other people are going to say, think, how they're going to process the information that we hold back. We don't start the business. We don't start the podcast. We don't launch the blog. We don't talk about it on social media because we are worried about the feelings that we're projecting onto other people. A, who cares? But B, like, you really don't know how the world's going to perceive it. You really don't know how someone's going to respond until you give them an opportunity to respond. My husband and I were having a conversation the other day because he's an artist and not like professionally yet, but he draws a lot at home. He's really talented. And he was like, well, I want to show you this thing I was working on, but it's kind of dark and scary. And you might think it's weird. And you go, and all these things he was saying to justify his art. And when I said, I don't think any of those things. But he was, because he's kind of new in showing me all the art he's working on. So it's like not an area of confidence he's like totally encompassed yet. So I think like that was his anxiety pouring out, right? Of, okay, but you might think, I don't think any of those things. I think it's brave that you're just showing me something you created. Because no matter what you're creating in the world, it takes an immense amount of bravery. So I'm not saying that he's projecting. Actually, yeah, I am totally saying that he was projecting. Yep. And I try not to I say this over and over in this defense mechanisms miniseries, try not to diagnose other people. And I think I just did it. I totally think I just did it. But anyway, it was a good example, right? You got the example. So not only does it keep you from sharing and putting yourself out there, but also it can put unnecessary pressure or shoulds or coulds on other people. And here's a few more examples of how that could show up. So a parent may be projecting unfulfilled ambitions onto their child in sports or other activities. So you want your kid to be a blank because maybe you were or weren't. Or I want my kindergartner to behave because I only got my card pulled in the 3rd grade. That's the only time I ever got in trouble, except that one time I got detention in high school for a 3rd tardy in Miss Moss's Spanish class. Yep, I'm still bitter about that. And so, but my kindergartner is super hyper, and focus and self-control are a struggle for us. And so I have to acknowledge his progress more than I acknowledge his perfection. But I could be projecting the fact that I want a well-behaved, perfect child because behavior issues weren't a struggle for me. But learning how not to project that onto him is huge for my fulfillment as a mother, and realizing that he's not a bad kid, but he's growing in some areas, you know? It also could be you assuming someone is upset because they don't want to talk right now. Like some kids, some men, some women walk in the door and they need a minute. That doesn't mean they're pissed. It just means they might need a minute to process, decompress, and think before you start. How was your day? What happened? Oh my gosh, tell me everything. Give people a minute. Let people settle in. One of the things that we started doing at the beginning of all of our meetings is celebrations, because sometimes people need a minute, and we can't automatically assume that they feel comfortable in a situation just because we've been there for 30 minutes beforehand and already feel comfortable. So just allowing some room sometimes will help with those projections. What about someone, and these two are not good, and definitely not good in any way, but someone who has a dislike for a coworker, and then they start everybody else doesn't like them either, and everybody else has problems with them, and then this adds into this overgeneralization that comes into this projection, when really they need to acknowledge their feelings of not liking someone rather than trying to rally the troops and get everybody in there with them. Camp building is what that's called. Or somebody that's insecure about their own looks, always criticizing other people's appearance. Betty, you need to focus on you and quit worrying about other people's outfits. Maybe she didn't have anything clean that day. But that's how projection shows up. And it's not healthy, and it's not good, and it's not constructive in those ways. And it doesn't help build up the people around us. And so for me personally, because we're trying to look in and not diagnose our partners, which I realize I did. Okay, you can put it in the comments. I know. But it's to accept the situations for what they are, not what we think it's going to be, should be, or could be. Give people an opportunity to respond before you put it on them. Well, I know you're going to think, stop. You don't know. Put it out there. Be brave and let people digest. And they may just surprise you. And this is the hard one. Recognizing when you're the problem and not always deflecting it to someone else. Because if you have an issue or you have a concern, own it. Communicate. So many things happen when we talk. I always say, the more we talk, the more we all talk. Okay, before we jump into the second half of our episode, I want to take a minute to share a recent experience I had with our sponsor today, The Space Co-working and Event Venue. So I was working up at The Space the other day, which is in the evenings and weekends, they have events and you can rent it out, and that's a fabulous place, fabulous venue for people in Central Arkansas. But also during the day, they have memberships and day passes for co-working. So if you need somewhere to work during the day that's away from office and busy distractions, it's the place for you. And so I was up there working the other day and had an opportunity to talk with one of the members who is a local small business owner. And he has an office at his business. And so why would he be working at a co-working space? Well, networking, but also he needs to get out of the office to free himself up from distractions, because he can sit there with his earbuds in a beautiful space, meet cool people, have snacks, have filtered water, have coffee, all right there. Doesn't have to leave. There's great restaurants below it, Baja Grill and Revival, and great restaurants around the corner. And he can work away from the office and away from all of his other staff. So now he's designated a couple days a week that he's working in the co-working venue. So it is just an amazing place that's been open in downtown Benton. And be sure and check out their website. They have all the rates on there for memberships as well as day passes. And the website is www.coworkthespace.com. And before we jump in the thick of defense mechanisms and talk about the second topic today, I do want to do my favorite part of the podcast, which is trivia in the trenches. And again, I didn't know this answer today. And I mean, okay, I got to stop because I was about to give it away. All right, here we go. Here's trivia in the trenches. What continent is Jamaica part of? North America. Huh? Isn't it like in the Caribbean? Yes, it's in the Caribbean. I've been there in 2015. Not my favorite place to go. Not gonna lie. Jamaican people were nice, but just not my favorite Caribbean island so far. But here are some fun facts about Jamaica. It is the third largest island in the Caribbean. It sits on top of an underwater mountain, which I think most islands are underwater mountains, or I guess part of them are over water, or like volcanoes, I think. It is home to one of the largest butterflies in the world. And this is the most interesting fact about Jamaica that I could find. Are you ready for it? The colors on the Jamaican flag make it one of just 2 in the world that don't share a color with the USA flag. So there's no red, white, or blue on it. And there's only one other flag. And that's your trivia to drop in the comments. What's the other flag? Yep, look it up. See, you can trivia in the trench me. Or that'd be like trivia in the comments. Yeah, that's probably what that would be. So back to the show for today. So the first half, we explored projection and how we use that as a defense mechanism. And the next one we're going to talk about is rationalization. And I don't think this is always a bad thing, but here's our definition. From the notes, rationalization is the use of logic or reasoning to justify something upsetting that's occurred. Again, not always bad. So the actual reasons for the event are avoided or replaced by seemingly other reasonable expectations. So you might change something difficult into, well, it's not so bad. It's a form of self-deception that can be effective to reduce, in the short term, anxiety and protect your self-esteem. So it's actually one of the psychological defense mechanism theories that was identified by Sigmund Freud. And a lot of us have heard Freud's, theories over the years, and several of them have been debunked. Now, his daughter is also does a lot of research in this area. So her take on things are sometimes different, especially the childhood stuff. But rationalization as a defense mechanism definitely has still held its value in the world of psychology. So it's a way for you to justify, your undesirable feelings. However, it keeps you from unconsciously really acknowledging the true reasons for your behaviors and actions. So there's kind of 2 parts of this. So you could use the term sour grapes, and it is when you rationalize and try to ignore difficult information. But I'm more of a sweet lemons person. And that is when I try to take a negative situation and cast it in a positive light, and usually end up getting screwed. I know I'm positive Polly. My cup is always half full. I just can't help it. It's who I am. That's where I'm at in life. But it's not just seeing bad situations. Like I talked about in part 2 of defense mechanisms, it's also played into my denial of realizing that team members didn't need to stay with us any longer. And I had rationalized that for way too long. So an easy example that you could probably see in your life is maybe you've been rejected for a date and you rationalize it by saying they weren't that cute anyway, because you just really don't want to deal with the pain of them not being attracted or into you. Or maybe you rationalize that your business failed because the economy was bad. Well, your business probably failed for a lot of reasons, and the economy can play into that, but you've got to take a look at what those reasons actually are. And so here, there's tons and tons of different categories of rationalization. And so I've narrowed it down to 6 for us to really kind of hone in on and look at examples so that it's not such a big list, because sometimes it can get overwhelming. So one of the ways people rationalize, and I mentioned this, is skipping the self-analysis. So instead of looking inward and how I contributed to this situation, divorce, loss of a job, failure of a business, going bankrupt, whatever it is, you try to sidestep that and make it somebody or something else's responsibility or problem. Maybe deflecting the blame. Now, and I'm not saying this lightly, but people that are victims of domestic abuse and other types of abuse often don't hold the blame where it needs to be on the offender, right? And so that is a defense mechanism of rationalizing that it wasn't their fault or somehow they were a party and caused this. And that kind of trauma leads to all kinds of other things, and it should have never happened to the victim in the first place. But that is an example of rationalizing. So if you have a boss that is verbally harassing you, it is their fault. It is not your fault. And being able to identify that you are the victim and not trying to take that blame on yourself, or concealing your mistakes, just trying to hide them because you don't want to be embarrassed about it. Ignoring your individual limitations. So something my friend Danny has taught me is that we as humans, so we have a soul that lives inside of us that's bigger than us, that lives on even after we die. Okay. It's a metaphysical thing. But our human bodies have limitations, such as sleep or the number of quality decisions we can make in a day. We can't rationalize that we're just weak. You're just tired. You're just not good enough, strong enough, tall enough, beautiful enough, smart enough. Like, you have physical limitations. And so when we can reverse that narrative in our brain, it helps us to realize that how we can operate within those limitations. All right, the last two are denying the reality of things that are happening around us and avoiding dealing with past trauma. So all of these types of rationalization are leading us to this one question that I'm going to leave you with today. Because again, this mini-series is about us turning inward, looking at ourselves, and figuring out how we can uproot these things inside of us. So here's your thought to consider for today. What are you not facing in your past or current life experiences? Is it grief, death, abuse? Because whether you realize it or not, whether we realize it or not, it is affecting every relationship in our lives. Until next time.
You've been listening to the Grit Crusade podcast with Brooke Plack. Our theme song is Thunder City by Lunar Ray, licensed through Soundstripe. This podcast was produced by Luminate Media Group. Thank you for listening, and we will see you on the next episode.